How you doing? Sterling hanging out fine Saturday afternoon. 700 WLW. Glad you're along. Lots happening. Beautiful Saturday. Out and about. It continues to be a problem, and I guess it's always been an issue. People trying to alter their sense of being, their sense of awareness, whatever else. And some of us are able to do it and do it and have some control over our lives, and some people don't. And obviously in the last 5 to 10 years, big problems with issues of opioids and prescription medication with that. And now you got worries about fentanyl, and everything else that goes along with it. And alcohol issues, of course, has been around since the beginning of time. A guy to be able to give us some insight on this, and something that came out here in the last week or so, which is which is sort of thrust into this conversation, because I feel like I'm beating my head against the wall here and trying to make sense of things. It's like, just say no, which I thought was a dumbass idea, going back to former First Lady Nancy Reagan and that whole plan, because I don't think a lot of people just said no, but it's a good starting point, I suppose. So it all comes back around, and arguably everything in moderation except like heroin and playing in traffic and hand grenades. But giving us some insight, giving us some direction in relation to this is the Vice President of Clinical Services at the CCAT, or Cat Sober House here, that's Center for Addiction Treatment in Cincinnati's Michael Rosen. Welcome to 700 WLW with Sterling on this fine Saturday afternoon. How you doing today?
Yeah, thanks, Sterling. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you today. Before we start, I feel like I need to revisit last hour. Everybody was having fun, and I was thinking maybe I should call in early and let you know about my first concert.
Oh, really? Okay, well, that's unusual, because usually we're looking all serious about, people getting strung out and getting healthy and falling off the wagon. Music, how much of that is related to concert experiences? That's a whole other story.
Well, let me tell you about my concert, and you can answer that. So I'm 13, 14 years old, just trying to be cool as a young teenager. My mom comes home and says, "Mike, I got us some tickets." And I said, "Sweet, a concert. We're going to Jim Brickman." I said, "Thanks, Mom."
Jim Brickman. And for those who don't know, this is the only song that we have readily available. And it's a Christmas song. So, yeah, as a teenager, you were probably thinking this is the best thing ever for you, huh?
Yeah, he's going to play the gift. Oh, that's a great gift, Mom.
Well, you got to have a hobby.
Yeah.
Well, that's all right. So really, you would have preferred Kiss, or who would, given a choice, your first concert, this is like one of those things, oh, my first time should have been this or that, which there's other connotations to that. But your first show would have been what?
I think I was born, a little bit too past my decade. I'm a classic rocker, so, of course, some of those that your callers were calling in with, I was like, I wish. But I guess in my heyday, it was early 90s, and I guess I was trying to be a punk rocker then, so some Offspring and some of those.
There you go. Made me feel a little bit old, but that's all right. I totally get that. But Offspring, fantastic, and they're still out doing it, which is kind of nice.
They are, yeah.
And the new record's actually pretty good. Let's get serious for a second. But you know what? It does tie into music, because there's a whole lot of issues when it comes to artists in general, and maybe you can speak to this, maybe you can't. But through your experience at the Center for Addiction Treatment, and just in general, artists through the ages have been known, many of them, to have issues with substance abuse and so on. But it is a microcosm, though, of something much larger, which is something that I think society as a whole has an issue with, and not just here stateside.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I don't know how we want to take this apart, but just to comment that when you look at music, there definitely seems to be something that just ties an experience, and we know that music is very experiential, and just the way that we form memories and form traditions. Music is real important, and I think that at the same time that we're finding out who we are through our music, experimentation is very common, and drugs often, like you said, just accompany it, and before you know it, they kind of go hand in hand.
Here we are sitting in towards the end of August 2019, after what has been probably the better part of a decade of opiates of one type or another, basically ravaging not just the tri-state, which has sort of been at the epicenter of a lot of this getting attention, but all around this country, even worse than what was thought to be really the old heyday of heroin and whatnot being the 50s, and then again sort of a resurgence in the 70s. There's so many songs written about it, so many artists, so many just everyday people affected by this. But this has been a different type of thing, and this may be beating a dead horse, pardon the pun, but something that maybe it's bewildering to me that this has continued to be, and in some cases, still a growing problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that not only is it a growing problem, just with overdoses that are, in our community every single day, but I think there still lacks just a basic education about the dangers of drug use and drug addiction, and then ultimately, just the complexity of the illness that we take a stance at our agency that's very medical based, it's very disease based, that simply just says this is harder than it's a choice. They just need to stop. You referenced your "Just Say No" slogan, and I think that we've evolved from there. We've had a lot of opportunity to look at the brain in different ways, since the 80s and start understanding what's going on. But treatment and policy is always, 15 years behind research. And I think that, right now where we are it's a critical moment to say it's time to take some informed action with, some common sense approaches that start simply at, let's start educating. Let's start making some differences by helping people understand really what this illness is about.
This has been a different type of ravaging of population historically, and some of the stuff that goes with the litigation by states like Ohio and others, going after manufacturer pharmaceutical companies in the distribution of, in the prescription medication end of this, not just on the street getting heroin or now the synthetics of the opioids. Looking at it from your lens, doing what you have done as Vice President of Clinical Services at the Center for Addiction Treatment here in Cincinnati, how do you see that, and how has that changed the way this has been addressed and handled? Certainly it seems, outside looking in, way different than the attitude towards, say, the crack epidemic of the 80s and into the 90s.
Yeah, I think that there's been lots of attention with it. For the first time in my lifetime, at least, I'm watching how this affects the community. It's not just the user, and it's not just the people in the group, but it's the families, it's the communities, it's the workforce. I mean, it's everybody. And I think that trying to legislate it out, trying to incarcerate it out, these solutions just haven't been as effective. And I think, for so much of it, it has to start at the core of who the person is and how that person relates, within a family system. And looking at, at this point, so much of this is generational that there's parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, and so much that it's just become what we do. And I meet people every day who their first time using has been with a parent or with an aunt or an uncle. And I think that, in order to really make a difference, we have to stop it there. So again, education is so important with the youth, with our adolescent people.
Something else that has been seen, and it is a ripple effect scenario, and it's not just that user, as you talked about, and it's, on the job, and it's on the streets, and I mean, whether it's first responders or schools now, the foster care system, you name it, like the crack epidemic, and even wider now, with this, is that we're seeing a burden on, and for the next 15 or 20 years, as these babies grow up that were born addicted, and parents that were absent, if not dead, or incarcerated, or affected and afflicted to such a point of the addiction not being functional, where grandparents were a part of having to provide care, or you mentioned multi-generations using and abusing and then having major problems. Exactly. Then you have foster care and everything else, where there are so many kids now that are part of this. This gets deep and will be felt for generations.
Yeah, undoubtedly. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get solved today. It doesn't get solved tomorrow. But I think that this is where we start the movement forward. And finally, that there is attention, that there are people who want to be involved, and there are people who are standing up and speaking to Congress, women and men, and speaking to schools, and really just taking this really to heart, because it is literally it's killing this generation. We've seen the average lifespan impacted, because of the overdose and the death directly related to the opioid epidemic.
It's a disturbing thing. I normally don't do this, but as such with time, I'm going to carry you over for a segment if you can. Do you have time to do that?
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
All right, I want to take a break, and we'll come back. I want to get into something that seems in one way obvious and one way not, but your perspective at the Center for Addiction and Treatment, Cat Sober House here in Cincinnati, as well as across the country, the way application of treatment and diagnosis is held. There's a health panel here in the United States that's recommending something different when it comes to screening. That is either over the top and intrusive, or how that's applied, or whatever. It gets interesting. So I want your take on it on the other side, just about 4.5 minutes, and then we'll give people a chance to sort of sound off on what they're dealing with similar issues here on your Saturday Sterling. We'll open up the phone lines too with the AcuteHearingCenter.com hotline, 749-7000, 800 the big one, pound 700 AT&T. At Sterling Radio on Twitter. Quick break, and we'll come back with Michael Rosen. He's the VP of Clinical Services at the Center for Addiction Treatment here in Cincinnati. I'm Sterling, 700 WLW. Sterling hanging out, fine Saturday afternoon, 700 WLW, 9 first 20 forecast. Sunshine today, 79, 58 tonight, clear. Sunshine again tomorrow, 83, looks nice. And start the week, a chance of some storms, but 80. So feeling like fall all of a sudden, but my guess is it'll be blazing hot again sooner than later. Still on the line, giving us some insight and perspective as the Vice President of Clinical Services for the Center for Addiction Treatment at CAT Center here, Sober House here in Cincinnati, is Michael Rosen. Back with Sterling on 700 WLW. Always good to get in your head and in perspective of what you guys do there in helping people. But it's not just opiates. You deal with all kinds of stuff, whether it's alcohol or, I don't know. What's the weirdest thing people are addicted to that have come to ask for help before we get to this health panel recommendation?
That's a great question. Most of the time, by the time they get to our place, we see a whole lot of just typical, the street drugs. Alcohol is actually on the rise again. Methamphetamine is definitely on the rise. The methamphetamine is an interesting one because nobody really knows what meth is. We got all these chemists, if you will, just in their backyard, back seats, making these substances, and there's all kinds of stuff in there. So that's a tough one. But we also work with different types of addiction behavioral addiction. So we treat a lot of gambling also. And it's interesting to watch just how the substances and the gambling or different behaviors can interact on top of each other. So,
and as far as addictions go, if someone has a likelihood of, maybe they have a gambling problem, maybe they drink, and that's an issue for them because some people just can't handle it. Arguably, is it a gene? Is it? Because I know that I have friends that have drank and partied and did a lot of things, hard bad things, hard for them, bad things in their lives, and then turned around, survived, and end up living healthier, happier lives, and have been doing so now for decades. But there seems to have been an intermingling of that. Are people prone to certain things, whether it's sex, whether it's food, whether it's the meth? The crack is back too, who knew people were hitting the glass pipe again like that? I don't know.
Yeah. So the general consensus is about 40 to 60% of addiction is has to do with a genetic makeup or predisposition for higher risk. But that still leaves, a lot of other risk elements and areas that have to do with a lot of environmental pieces. And that's really one thing that I think is so important that our listeners understand, is just that anybody can be susceptible to addiction, even if you don't have a strong genetic predisposition or likelihood to it.
Is it searching for numbness? Is it searching for pleasure? The term I've used before, and I don't think I'm the first, but it's the first thing I can think of about altering one's feeling grasp of reality, is like spinning around in circles or on one of the, I don't know if it's a merry-go-round or whatever that thing is where you can spin it around as a kid in the playground, and then you get dizzy and sort of fall down and get a little weird feeling. That, I think, is probably, unless your parents are feeding you booze to put you to sleep or something, that's like the first place where people find something that is not quite the everyday feeling of life as we know it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of all that there, Sterling, that the pleasure, the euphoria, but then also the escape. And just that different drugs, of course, have different types of effects on someone. But for most people, kind of what it is that they find something that just works. It helps them change how they're feeling. If you're using the drug that's not changing the way you're feeling, it's kind of a crappy drug, right?
So it's changing your state, right? Whether it's a couple of beers and being able to handle yourself, or somebody who's, bottle after bottle and missing work and not taking care of their life, and then off the rails and down the rabbit hole.
Exactly, yeah.
It gets scary. I got to ask you this because this is interesting to me, and I don't know how often people go to the doctor for regular maintenance, like a car. You get your oil change, tire rotation, maybe you get your regular annual physical or whatever, and a doc may have questions for you, whether there are indications that lead them to ask questions about this or about tests. I don't know how much is about insurance companies. But this, apparently it's an influential group of doctors and health experts. I don't know. It's called U.S. Preventative Services Task Force. It was a Washington Post article, came out in the last week, 10 days. It was thought-provoking, but I figured I'd reach out to you guys to find out about it. They're recommending that doctors screen all adults for illicit drug use. So what does that screening mean as far as asking questions? Does that mean drug panels of some sort and testing? And what do you think, doing what you do in your everyday life as Center for Addiction Treatment here in Cincinnati?
Well, I think your first question is a really good one. What does that mean? And I think that's kind of still up for verdict. A lot of people are asking that same question of what does screening actually mean. At our site, we do perform screenings. We do perform urine drugs tests. We perform, a variety of different types of batteries or questionnaires. We perform, different lab work, blood tests, blood draws. That all would kind of, look at to what degree is somebody using some form of illicit substance. But I think that when I read this article by the Washington Post the other day, it really kind of started challenging a lot of that because, as you said, it kind of just is a blanket policy that would say doctors need to test all adults for this, and it's kind of unknown what that means after that. So I think if we had a position, it would kind of be unknown or undeclared at this point. We'd want to certainly know more. But I think that just the point that there's some challenges that are raised, of course, just with any well-meaning policy that really starts with. If somebody is identified or screened positive, well, what then? And it gets a little bit of what we talked about before the break, just about education, and are our doctors even well informed about what to do? Do they know in their own training about, well, what is addiction specifically? And depending, frankly, on when they receive their medical license and what caliber of studies they've indulged into, it's very possible that many practicing doctors right now know relatively little about, such a severe condition known as addiction.
Have you seen anything? People a week or two ago, in big response on this, and it came up in passing, and we're short on time here, but I got to know the issues with weed. It's been more or less normalized in some fashion or another. It's being decriminalized when it comes to recreation in many states. It's been talked about here, but we're still trying to work out the kinks, I guess, of the medicinal purpose of it and the health issues of it. And studies have been limited. But one of the questions about that and addiction, and that being either a gateway like cigarettes to alcohol, to weed or otherwise, and then down a rabbit hole, and the issues of schizophrenia and how that's, because really people self-medicate in a lot of different ways, and hell, huge records even discussing that because it's that common.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, no.
What have you seen with that, if anything? And do you see that as an uptick, and the same thing just in general, getting better or worse overall when it comes to addiction and substance stuff?
I'd say that what we're seeing is a lot of replacement or switching. We used to, for years on years, you see opiates, more opiates, only opiates. And in the past about 2 years, it's really starting to kind of trend down with the rise of methamphetamine, with the rise of alcohol, with the rise of marijuana. Partly, like you suggested, it is becoming more normalized, which many call a gateway drug. The way that we see it, I think actually in the article itself from the Washington Post, there was a stat: 85% of drug users have reported using marijuana since age 12 or something. But it's absolutely just kind of part of the trend that if people who use marijuana likely are going to use something else, or people who are using something else, are likely using or have used marijuana.
So whether it's alcohol or whatever else, it's sample something else one way that people don't stay the same path.
Correct.
Gotcha. We're out of time, but I could talk to you forever, and people can certainly reach out and find out more either virtually or certainly in person. That is catsober.org. I'll make sure to get that on Twitter and so on. I really appreciate your time. Anything else in parting words? Michael Rosen, the Vice President of Clinical Services, Cincinnati Center for Addiction and Treatment. It's called the Cat Sober House. Anything before we let you hop?
No, thanks a lot for having me on. And just again, we're here to help anybody who has struggles with any addiction or knows somebody who's struggling.
There you go. I appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Take care of yourself, Mike.
You do the same.
All right, a little bit behind, but I apologize. Matt Reese has your 4:30 report. More Sterling coming up, 700 WLW.